Hello, welcome everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 126th meeting that we have had consecutively. And thank you everyone who has been part of this process, who's been a veteran of this process, and everyone who's new. And I'm sorry, there's an echo. If we could figure out where that echo is coming from. Thank you. We want to welcome everyone who has been part of this process. And please take a moment to share this invitation with your friends, your family members, your organizations. Please invite them to this. We want to keep growing. And if you are for true peace, then you are welcome here. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed. And I do like to remind people why we created this process 126 weeks ago, just to start off every meeting. We did this in order to bring together the international peace movement, which I'm sure as many of you who have been part of this, there's been a lot of infighting and people don't talk to each other who are of different philosophies. We wanted to create a forum where people of many different philosophies and religions and nationalities and languages can come together to coordinate their activities and collaborate on creating this peaceful world that we want to see. And there are a lot of very important updates this week on making that happen, including coming from the Pope and coming in around Cusa, which is what was in the invitation this week. So to start us off today, I'd like to go to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Thank you, Anastasia, and hello to all of you. Well, the picture of the world is both challenging, frightening, and hopeful at the same time. With other words, that the danger of nuclear annihilation still hangs over us like a Damocles sword, but there are also rays of hope on the horizon, that there is a pathway how we could avoid such a tragedy. Now, let me start first with the summit which took place between President Trump and President Xi Jinping in South Korea. Now, that was a 12 on a scale of 1 to 10, according to President Trump, which means he thought it was a very positive outcome. I think it calmed down the situation in terms of the trade war and restarted some direct communication between the presidents of the two strongest economies in the world. That is for sure positive. I think it did not at all eliminate the underlying tensions. So that's one thing. And, President Trump then responded to what he thought was an announcement of a nuclear test, a resumption of nuclear testing. What it actually referred was the tests of the Russian supersonic missile, cruise missile, the Burevestnik, which is fueled by a nuclear reactor. It flies at very high hypersonic times for a very long time. It's maneuverable, and therefore it is not matched by any other missile on the Western side.
No, I can't get the picture. Well, at least you can hear it.
Can you please mute yourself, whoever is speaking there? So it is not what was tested was the missile, but not the nuclear aspect of it. But apparently Trump mistook it and said that the United States will now resume nuclear testing as well. Whereupon the Russian government spokesman Peskov said that he hoped that President Trump had been informed in the proper way about the tests of the Burevestnik cruise missile and the Poseidon underwater missile, which both were not nuclear tests. But, that shows you, the how fragile the whole situation really is. Now, I think that the main advantage of the Burevestnik, according to Putin, and I will not go into it at length because we have a much more qualified person to speak about that, namely Ray McGovern. So I just want to point to the fact that according to Putin, it is the fact that this missile is fueled by a very, very small nuclear reactor, which according to Putin is 1,000 times smaller than that which is powering submarines. So it is for sure a major technological breakthrough. Does it shift the strategic balance together with the Oreshnik? Well, we will be able to discuss that. Now, that does not deter madness on the side of the European Union members. For example, the recent most incredible statement came from the Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken, who, when he was asked in an interview if the delivery of the Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine would not risk an all-out war between NATO and Russia, he said, "Oh, this doesn't concern me because Moscow will be wiped out from the map." And on the danger of a conventional, or the question if there was a danger of a conventional attack on Brussels, he said this would result in Moscow being flattened. To which then Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Khrushchev, absolutely denounced such an irresponsible rhetoric and correctly named an atmosphere of military psychosis in Europe. Yeah, and then, the ongoing debate, militarization, build-up in Europe is just absolutely, the atmosphere is psychotic. I can only confirm that. So it is no surprise that the program director of the Valdai Club, Timofey Bordashev, basically responded to the demand of certain European countries to rearm with nuclear weapons, like, for example, Germany. He said, this is the nuclear illusion of a collapsing Western Europe. The Western European leaders do not qualify to control nuclear weapons. And he spoke correctly of the third phase of the long decline of Europe, which started with the period between 1914 to 18, then after the complete loss of sovereignty to the United States, after the collapse of the Second World War, the defeat in the Second World War, and now the third phase. And indeed, the decline in Europe is breathtaking. You have right now beginning to show in the most dramatic way that the entire bottom of the German industry is falling out. The job centers of northern Germany announced that there is to be expected a mass wave of layoffs in Wolfsburg and Braunschweig. These are the cities where one of the centers of the auto industry of Germany is located, mainly the VW, but also certain Mercedes. So this is, Germany is collapsing, and I can only tell you, we have been warning about that for a very long time, but now it is really coming on big time. And with the present European leadership, they are doing absolutely nothing to reverse this. And I think we are looking just straight into the abyss because the social consequences of this collapse will be enormous. Now, if that would not be enough, naturally, the underlying financial disorder is even much worse. And I can only point to an article by Professor Hilary Allen from the American University, Washington College of Law, who is an author also on many books concerning the financial system. And she predicts a soon to happen crash of AI followed by a crash and a wave of defaults in the cryptocurrency market, government bonds crash. So it really looks like the everything bubble. The crash is coming very close. So the other unfortunate aspect of American policy naturally is the pending, almost certain invasion in Venezuela, a land invasion, where basically the pretext is that the government of Maduro would be collaborating with the drug cartel. Now, already 50 people have been killed in illegal killings, just claiming these are drug boats without any due process, without any proof. And, it really reminds you of the insistence that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction in 2003, where everybody knew already ahead of time that that was a lie. And likewise, everybody knows and sees that the accusation of collaboration with the drug cartel is just a pretext to get for regime change in Venezuela, to access the rich raw materials and energy sources of Venezuela. And it could lead to an explosion in all of Latin America, because this is just, if this would happen, it just goes one step too far. Now, I therefore want to emphasize a statement made by the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has announced an anti-war campaign in all Hungarian cities. This is supposed to oppose the bellicose policy of the European Union. It's supposed to start on November 15th in the Hungarian city of Győr, which is in the northwest of Hungary, sort of in the middle between Bratislava and Budapest, and then to be followed by rallies in many other cities. And I would actually like to suggest to the IPC that we support this campaign of Prime Minister Orban and think of European-wide support of this initiative, because we have to mobilize the population in ways, which is adequate to the danger, which would basically mean to have millions in the streets every day. So that is in very short strokes the strategic picture. Then naturally the situation in Gaza remains one of absolute horror. The ceasefire obviously does not hold. The killing continues. And there also we will have speakers addressing this. So I only want to report that it is quite significant that the Elders, which is an organization which has been founded by Nelson Mandela and consists mainly out of former heads of state, they have made an urgent call to release Marwan Barghouti from Israeli prison, because he would be a big step towards the two-state solution for Gaza and Palestine. This obviously should be fully supported. And, there was this Gaza People Tribunal under the leadership of Richard Falk, which had many experts and witnesses, and they issued a report about the ongoing genocide, saying that they don't have the authority of a state, but when the states fail to address a great injustice, they have to appeal to the conscience of the people. And this is what this tribunal was supposed to do. Now, after all these dangerous and horrible developments, let me point to the one really absolutely positive and breakthrough development, which I referred to in the beginning as giving us reason for hope. And that is that the Pope Francis XIV, in his sermon to at the occasion of the Jubilee, in front of thousands of people meeting in St. Peter's Square, was evoking Nicholas of Cusa. And this is a real breakthrough, because, what the Pope said is that there is still not so much known cardinal from the 15th century, Nicholas of Cusa, who developed the conception of the concordance of the coincidence of opposites, the coincidentia oppositorum. And this gives hope because it points to being able to see something which is not yet in existence, but what we know will come to existence. Now, if you, some of you or many of you may remember that we have been mentioning the importance of Nicholas of Cusa actually for decades. I mean, the IPC is not there for decades, but we started to use the ideas of Nicholas, not just in an academic way, but to apply it for the solution of political crisis. And that's exactly what Pope Leo XIV is doing as well, because he says Nicholas of Cusa came up with this idea in equally turbulent times in the 15th century as a method of approaching problems, which is giving hope. And indeed, what this coincidence of opposite method means is that the human mind, being the imago viva Dei, the living image of God, not just the image of God, but the living, with other words, gifted with the vis creativa, the creative power, man can always conceptualize the higher one, the solution on a plane which is on a completely different magnitude than the level on which the problem arose. And Einstein later on made the same demand, saying that a solution can never be on the level where the problem started. And the method of Nicholas of Cusa is exactly that. Naturally, he argued it from a theological standpoint. Naturally, the higher one is lying in God, it is God. But it is a method where you can train the mind to always come up with such an idea that you can find a unity of where all the contradictions are overcome. Now, that method has been applied by Nicholas himself, for example, in the De Pace Fide, a beautiful Socratic dialogue of 17 religions and cultures who go to God and say, we are all killing ourselves or each other, we're killing each other in your name. Can you help us how we can overcome that? And then in a very beautiful way, in a manductio, in a pedagogical fashion, Cusa lifts the mind of all these 17 representatives to the understanding that there is only one truth, one religion, and one God, which is the higher one, in which solutions can be found. He also applied that same method of thinking in the effort to invent the quadrature of the circle, which all thinkers before him had completely failed, by applying it in the same way to conceptualize that the circle is of a completely different quality than the Viereck, the polygon, or the many possible polygons. So I think that this is important because Nicholas of Cusa is also the father of the modern nation state. He was the one who, for the first time, developed the concept of the representative system, whereby the individual, for the first time, had the possibility to participate in government because the representatives, which are elected, have a reciprocal responsibility to the government and to the governed. And that was a completely new idea, which had an enormous importance for the entire European history. And naturally, the notion of that government is only legitimate if it has the consent of the governed is also one of the great accomplishments of European history, because, as you can see, you have today many governments who have only 11% support, like Macron, where you cannot really say that he has the consent of the governed anymore, or likewise the British or the German government. So I think these ideas are extremely important, and we absolutely want to, call on all religions, not just the Catholics, but also other religions
aussi
to
toutes
study
les
the
autres
method of
religions,
Nicholas of
d'étudier la
Cusa
méthode
and
de
make their
Nicolas de Cuse.
influence
Et,
French
felt in
interpreter,
the
please go to your own
it-
channel.
in the political field, that the politicians, especially those who claim that they are religiously anchored, like the Christian Democrats in Germany and others, that they must listen to the Pope, because this intervention of the Pope, if it is carried out by all the priests and imams and rabbis and other religious leaders, it can change the world, because it is, as Cusa said in the 15th century, at the time, he said, I'm now saying something which has not been thought by any human being before me. And I can only assure you, it is a method of thinking which is completely different than the Aristotelian method, which only goes from contradiction to contradiction. But it is to think from above, to think the unity of humanity first before you address any other problem. And then you can find a solution to every single problem on the planet. So therefore, my initial message of today is both, one of relative despair, because the situation in Europe in particular remains extremely grave, the Middle East grave, Latin America very problematic. But coming from Leo the 14th, there is the message of hope that if we use it, we can solve all problems.
Wonderful. Thank you, Helga. I think it is notable that that Prime Minister Orban did meet with Pope Leo just before he made this announcement, and I'm including the links that you've mentioned to Prime Minister Orban's announcement for people to look at, so we can endorse this and get lots of activity and support. Also, what Pope Leo discussed with Cusa in front of 10,000 Jubilee pilgrims just a couple of days ago, and the elders' call on Trump to release Marwan Barghouti, which all of these are very important things to distribute and get out, read, and understand. So thank you so much, Helga, for going through that general overview for us today. Okay, we shall continue. Um, so next, we are going to go to our friend Ray McGovern, who it's so wonderful to have you back on. Ray, thank you so much for joining us today. Ray McGovern is a former CIA analyst, co-founder of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and a fantastic interventionist. So please go ahead, Ray, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Anastasia. I'd like to talk about Budavyesnich, Oryeshnik, and the Poseidon, the show of force that Putin and the Russian army and air force have shown over the last couple of days, weeks. I'd like to set the tone by just reminding folks who don't know that the reason I'm so old is that I had some experiences quite young in my career, among them working as chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch as the negotiations on the first ABM treaty, anti-ballistic missile treaty, was being done in Moscow. Actually, the negotiations were the Helsinki and Vienna. Anyhow, my branch played a major role in that, as did Jet Maclot's branch over there in State Department. We played a role in convincing Nixon and Kissinger that the Russians were really serious about arms control, not only on its merits, but because they were saw themselves in a leapfrog, in a kind of really hastened race with China to build a good relationship with us. And we played a role, of course, in the Doverai, no Proverai, trust but verify. Did the Russians violate the ABM treaty? Yes, they did. Did we catch them? Yes, we did. Did we report to Reagan? Yes, we did. He told us go talk to the Russians. Long story short, when Gorbachev came in, they tore that extra ABM radar down. Now, what I'd like to talk about now is how the strategic equation has changed markedly. The ABM Treaty, which is the foundation, the cornerstone of strategic stability, okay? In a word, no one could think they could do a first strike on the other country without suffering a terrible reaction, another strike, a counter strike, okay? 30 years. So 2002, John Bolton, now indicted, encouraged President W. Bush, let's get out of it. We don't need that. We can beat the Russians. Let's get out of there. And so they get out of it, okay? Now, what I'm going to show you now is what happened after Putin tried manfully to remind the West that, you know, we can cooperate with you, but all you could say is no, and you won't even listen to us. That started really at 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. Putin made a very explicit speech. And then later, he made it even more explicit, but, and mark this, because US officials were not listening, he gathered a little rump group of Western journalists together. They happened to be up in St. Petersburg for an economic summit. And he gathered them together and he vented, okay? He got angry. He kind of almost lost it. And what I'm going to show you now, if the technology works, is a 6.5 minute a segment of this interview that Putin gave, or actually a little speech he gave to these Western journalists. Now, I know that most of our audience are well awake by now, but for those in the East Coast who are just, you have to pay really close attention to this. And not so much Putin's demeanor, but the subtitles. And because it goes fast, even though it's 6 minutes, I ask you to watch it carefully, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss what it really means in terms of the Oreshnik, the Budoviesnik, and the Poseidon. So with that, let me see. Yeah, I would just say, can we let that that excerpt roll? Mind you, this is in St. Petersburg, a sort of a captive audience. He invited these Western journalists. Some of them came, some of them you see nodding. And that's, I think, partly what gets Putin so upset. Yeah, you're not listening. My God, don't you understand the importance of this? Can we let that thing roll?
Теперь по поводу ПРО. Послушайте, вот здесь все очень взрослые люди и уже опытные. Мы с вами, я сейчас не буду просить, чтобы вы это все, вот так, как я скажу, отражали в своих материалах, влияли на прессу там, или как. Я просто вам, вот знаете, хочу вам лично сказать, напомнить какие-то вещи. Ведь мир избавлен от крупномасштабных войн и военных конфликтов. Мы с вами все об этом знаем. Благодаря так называемому стратегическому балансу, который был достигнут после того, как две суперядерные державы договорились фактически о сдерживании и в росте наступательных вооружений, и о сдерживании в системах противоракетной обороны. Потому что для всех понятно, если одна сторона развивает противоракетную оборону успешнее, чем вторая, то она приобретает преимущество, и у нее появляется искушение использовать это оружие первой. Поэтому это один из краеугольных камней международной безопасности. Система противоракетной обороны и договоренности в этой сфере. Я далек от того, чтобы кого-то ругать, обвинять в чем-то. Но когда наши партнеры американские вышли в одностороннем порядке, они нанесли колоссальный удар, или вот это был первый удар по международной стабильности с точки зрения возможности нарушения баланса сил стратегического. Тогда я сказал, ну, мы сейчас не можем развивать эти технологии, поскольку, дорого, во-вторых, еще неизвестно, как они будут работать. Мы не будем просто деньги палить. Мы пойдем по другому пути, мы будем совершенствовать ударные системы, чтобы сохранить баланс. Только для этого. Не для того, чтобы угрожать кому-то. Нам ответили, ну да, это вот наша система ПРО не против вас, а то, что вы делаете, мы исходим из того, что это не против нас. Ну и делайте, что хотите. Я думаю, что вот такой постановка вопроса, она связана с тем, я уже говорил, по-моему, сегодня на пленарном заседании, связана была с тем, что это же начало 2000-х годов, Россия находилась в очень сложном положении. Развал экономики, значит, фактически гражданская война и борьба с терроризмом на Кавказе, оборонная промышленность в развале, вооруженные силы в ужасном состоянии. Ну, кому в голову приходилось, что Россия сможет наращивать стратегические вооружения? Наверное, думали о том, что пройдет некоторое время, имеющиеся, доставшиеся от Советского Союза вооружения будут деградировать. Поэтому надо сказать, да делайте, что хотите. Но мы предупреждали, что мы будем это делать. Мы сказали об этом. И мы делаем. И я вас уверяю, сегодня Россия добилась существенных успехов на этом пути. Я сейчас не буду всего перечислять, но мы модернизировали наши комплексы. И успешно развиваем новые поколения. Я уже не говорю о системах преодоления, системы противоракетной обороны. Но наши партнеры, несмотря на все наши возражения, на все наши предложения о реальном сотрудничестве, не хотят с нами сотрудничать, отвергают все наши предложения и действуют по своему плану. Я сейчас не буду, некоторые вещи считаю даже пока некорректным говорить публично. Но вы можете мне верить, можете не верить. Мы предлагали конкретные элементы, конкретный вариант сотрудничества. Они реально все были отклонены. Но вот все-таки пришли к тому, что сейчас построили систему ПРО в Румынии. Говорили это все время о чем? Нам нужно защититься от иранской ядерной угрозы. Где ядерная угроза иранская? Ее нет? Договор подписали уже. И причем Соединенные Штаты были, по сути, инициаторами этого договора с Ираном. Мы помогли, мы поддержали. Но если бы не позиция США, не было бы этого договора. И это, безусловно, заслуга президента Обамы. Потому что я считаю, это договор правильный, он разрядил ситуацию вокруг Ирана. И президент Обама может записать это, безусловно, в свой послужной список как результат своей работы на этом направлении. Но угрозы нет, а система ПРО продолжает строиться. Значит, мы были правы, когда говорили, что нас обманывают, с нами неискренне, ссылаясь на якобы имеющуюся иранскую ядерную угрозу при строительстве системы ПРО. Ну так оно и есть на самом деле. В очередной раз пытались нас надуть. Сейчас построили эту систему, сейчас ставят там ракеты. Так? Но вам должно быть известно, что ракеты эти закладываются в капсулу, которая используется для пусков ракет средней дальности «Томагавк» морского базирования. Значит, туда закладывают сейчас антиракеты, способные поражать цели на расстоянии 500 километров. Но мы знаем, технологии развиваются. Мы примерно знаем, в каком году примерно американцы получат новую ракету, которая будет уже не 500 километров, а 1000, а потом больше. И с этого момента они начнут угрожать нашему ядерному потенциалу. Мы по годам знаем, что будет происходить. И они знают, что мы знаем. Это вам только вешают лапшу на уши, как у нас говорят. А вы, в свою очередь, вешаете своему населению. И люди не чувствуют опасности. Вот меня что беспокоит. Ну как мы не можем понять? Мы тащим мир вообще в совершенно новое измерение. Вот в чем проблема. Делают вид, что как будто ничего не происходит. Но я не знаю даже, как достучаться. И о чем говорят? Это часть
That would do it,
оборонного.
actually. That would do it. Thank you so much. Now, let's, can I be seen? I can, okay. Let's go through this a little more carefully. This is 2016, the exact date, June 17, 2016. So this is well after Putin's 2007 speech to the Munich Security Council. The Russians have been working on things other than ABM. They considered ABM to be a waste of money. And so they talk about, first of all, look, says Putin, I don't expect you to record this and tell it to your editors or your publishers. I don't even expect you to encourage that this word gets out. I'm just going to talk to you as private citizens. Wow. Was he right about that? Of course he was right about that. This is probably the first time any of you have seen these kinds of things. He's talking about anti-missiles, and he's talking about betrayals, and the shift, most important, in the geostrategic balance of power. Now, then he says in 2016, and we've had a lot of success in what we've done. I can't disclose everything. I can't tell it to you right now, but we have found real solutions. 2 years later, during his State of the Union address, March 1st, 2018, Putin did this remarkable thing of a show and tell time, showing videos of those new weapons that they had developed, including the Boryeshnik, which now has been successfully tested. If you want to hear the specifics about it, look at the EIR for today. Good article on that. Suffice it to say it's nuclear powered. Can you believe it? And that it has lingering capabilities, and it can defeat most, if not all, air defense systems or anti-missile systems. So at the end of it, he says, now look, we're reasonable people. This is what we had to do. And will you believe us now, says he on March 1st, 2018. Now, this is all after the coup in Kiev. So the Russians are being very careful, not only to build up their conventional weaponry in case they need to invade Ukraine in their view, but also the ace in the hole, these weapons that cannot be defended against. That's really big, okay? And that's what we have now. So here, the Ukraine war is being ended with the Russians winning. It's very clear in the Donbass. And, well, it's clear across the whole front line, just a matter of time before the Russians could take the most fortified positions, okay? So what do they say? They say, look, we've got two cauldrons. We've got people surrounded. 5,000 in one area, 5,500 in another area. Look, we don't want to kill them, says Putin a week ago. We like to take them as POWs, and we will treat them according to international and national law. So please, the war is over. And by the way, the most recent offer, we have tried to get the Ukrainians to agree to let Western or other journalists into these cauldrons to see what's really going on there. Now, we don't want any fooling around. We don't want a false flag attacks. But if we can get assurances, yeah, Western or other journalists can get in to see what's like in these cauldrons. Now, the other part of that speech, in fatigues before the general staff, Sunday, I guess it was, last Sunday, Putin says, look, by the way, we have this Buravesnik. It's now been successfully tested. It's pretty much ready to go. And this is what it does. Okay, again, you can read that article in the EIR. So do we want to use this? No, of course we don't want to use this, but in a way we have outmatched the US. And so if there's any question about the conventional balance of forces, well, just look at Ukraine. If there's any question about the strategic balance of forces, well, just look at Oreshnik, Buravesnik, and Poseidon, okay? Now, what does that mean? I'd like to just listen to this. I've been around a long time. This means that the Russians outmatch us clearly in conventional warfare, weaponry, and tactics. It also means that the Russians have an edge, a certain edge in strategic weapons, strategic weapons that cannot be intercepted or downed. Now, the strategic thing is really important, but we all die in a strategic thing, so the Russians are not going to use their strategic weaponry unless they really see it that they have to. Last thing here, there is an offer on the table. The Russians have made it clear that even though the New START treaty expires on February 5 next year, they are willing not to amend or fix the treaty. No, the treaty is dead, but they're willing to keep the quantitative limits on offensive strategic missiles to, I think, it's 1,550 on each side. They're willing to do that if the U.S. will do the same for a whole year while they work out maybe a new treaty or they work out some sort of understanding that gets the situation back to where it was in 1972, where there was a balance. It was a balance of terror, right? But always a balance. Things are not balanced right now. That offer was made on the 22nd of September. What has the U.S. said about that? Trump was asked at one point, what do you think about it? Oh, yeah, sounds like a good idea to me. Now, the Russians are asking for a slightly more official answer, but Ryabkov said this week, look, it's not there's a time limit on this. It's not, you can't just kind of defer your response to this. So let me wind up here and say, look, the Russians have developed, when they were said niet to, when they were said no to on all their overtures since Putin took over to work out a decent balance, they worked on these weapons who are now maturing, now advertised in the State of the Union address on March 1st, 2018. You ought to look at that. It's quite an amazing address. All these videos, it's show and tell. This is what we're developing. This is what's ready. This is what now is ready, the Buryatnisk. So what am I saying here? I'm saying there's still hope because Trump is so unpredictable that for all I know, next week he will say, well, you know, it is a good idea. We're getting together in Geneva. We're going to try to make sure that we don't exceed the limits for a year, just as Mr. Putin has proposed. Is there going to be a summit anytime soon? Almost certainly no. But having no summit is far better than having a summit that is ill-prepared. The idea was Trump's, for God's sake. He canceled the idea. I guess there are lots of reasons behind that, but we should be happy that there's no ill-prepared summit. Last thing I'll say, what was the last thing I'll say? Well, I think I've said it. The New START is the hope, not that it can be renewed, but that something like it can be put in place so that there's some semblance of geostrategic balance. Right now, the Russians have the edge. Again, in the strategic sphere, doesn't matter as much because we'll all be dead, okay? But in the conventional sphere, it's just a matter of how long Putin will decide he'll take to take the rest of southern Ukraine. He'd dearly love to have an agreement secured by the U.S. and others so that he doesn't have to take all of Ukraine. But if you have to take all of Ukraine, I think he's prepared to do that. He's certainly capable of doing that. We ought to face facts and make sure that we choose the negotiation path, and I'll end there. Thanks for letting me carry on as long as I did.
Thank you very much, Ray. We enjoy that you're carrying on. I am putting in the chat, I put in the chat for everyone the article which you referenced on the Burevestnik missile technology from EIR, so folks can take a look at that. But thank you again, Ray, for your analysis and your insights into what's going on in the world. We shall continue with our agenda. Next, we have John Steinbach of the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Peace Committee of the National Capital Area. And thank you so much for joining us again, John. It was wonderful to have you on a few weeks back. We do also appreciate your analysis on what's happening in the world. You have the floor.
Thank you, Anastasia, and thank the Scheller Institute for pulling together these diverse voices. I was reflecting that one of the major websites having to do with peace and nuclear disarmament is antiwar.com. And these are mostly libertarians, various flavors of libertarians. Some of them left libertarians, some of them right libertarians. And yet large parts of the peace movement and anti-nuclear movement really don't want to work with those people because we don't agree with them. So my thoughts go back to the old anti-imperialist league movement back in the late 19th century, where you had wildly different political voices coming together saying no to U.S. imperialism. So maybe we need to kind of get back to that mindset. But I'm setting my timer now so I don't go over. So going back to what Ray first said, he talked about how strategically things are different, and everything has changed. It's not just the nuclear strategy policies, it's the entire geopolitical sphere has changed radically from what it was back in the 60s or in the 80s or even 20 years ago. And yet there's an absolute refusal on the part of the Western establishment to recognize that and understand that. It's almost breathtaking, the refusal to actually accept reality. And if we can't accept reality the way that it is, then it's really very difficult to go forward in a rational way. So what I wanted to talk about was Vasily Arkhipov Day, which was on October 28th. And I think that Vasily Arkhipov Day needs to be much more important in terms of the peace movement. There was very little recognition this year that it even existed. And very briefly, Vasily Arkhipov was the flotilla commander during the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. So he was in charge of all of the Soviet Navy vessels. He was on one of the Soviet submarines, and this was one of the submarines carrying nuclear-tipped torpedoes. And the policy was, if you are under attack and you've lost surface communication, you should assume World War III has already started. So the U.S. Navy was setting off depth charges. The temperature was rising. There was a mechanical malfunction. Things were going crazy. And the captain and the first mate decided that they would launch their nuclear torpedoes. So Arkhipov was an older guy, and he was a student of history, and he understood that what was happening was the U.S. Navy was not actually attacking the submarine. They were using depth charges to signal it to come to the surface and identify itself. And he countermanded that order. And had those nuclear torpedoes been used against the U.S. Navy fleet, it's almost 100% certain it would have been the end of the world. And out of that, though, we need to take a lesson, because Kennedy gave an ultimatum to Khrushchev. You have 24 hours to agree to remove the missiles from Cuba. And so Khrushchev came back and said, well, what about your missiles in Turkey and in Italy? And Kennedy said, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to be, bullied about. And so what happened was that Khrushchev made a courageous choice and removed the missiles. And the lesson learned in the United States was that the Soviet Union and Russia are always going to cave in, that they are weak, and all we have to do is be strong. And that's where we are still. That mindset is there today, but Russia is very, very strong now. So then I want to fast forward very briefly to 1983, and Ray has good memories of '62, but he was kind of part of the scene in '83, so he knows more than I do. But I've been studying it, and there was a exercise called Able Archer, and this was a big major exercise involving B-52 bombers and involving, dry runs of arming nuclear warheads and transferring the nuclear warheads to NATO to be used in the European theater. And this is in the context of Reagan being elected, in the context of Star Wars, in the context of evil empire, in the context of Reagan going ahead and implementing the policies that Carter had come forward with, which were Directive 59, which basically ordered the United States to prepare for a first strike strategy, in really in shorthand, and also in the context of the announced deployment of Pershing cruise missiles to Europe. And Alexander Haig saying we're going to shoot a nuclear warning shot over Europe if Soviet Union does anything. So that was the context for these war games. And one of the important commanders in the Soviet Union, Stanislav Petrov, who was one of the main architects of a new computer system that was designed to determine when the United States launched the first strike, was in charge when the computer system 3 times said that the United States had launched a massive ballistic missile attack on Russia. And he looked at the screens and he said, I don't know. And he did, instead of following directions and passing that information on to Moscow, he thought there was something wrong. He thought it was a mistake. And he started looking at the actual physical radar, and the physical radar was telling him, no, it's not an attack. So basically, he did not pass on that information. It turned out that there was an unusual cloud formation over the Strategic Air Command in Denver, and the computers were mistaking these clouds for a mass launch of ballistic missiles. So those are the 2 times that we've come the closest to nuclear war. There are 5 or 6 other incidents involving geese, involving weather satellite launches, and so on, that have also brought us to the edge of nuclear war. So today, going back to where Ray left us off, today we are on the verge of losing the last of the arms limitation treaties, the New START treaty, and we are also in a stage where, the one positive thing I will give to the Trump administration is there at least is a semblance of communication between Moscow and Washington. That didn't exist functionally in the Biden administration. So I want to give Trump credit for that. There's some talk, but on the other hand, when we look at what's going on not just in Ukraine but in the Middle East and other flashpoints around the world, we really are. It's a miracle that we have not had a nuclear war. It's a miracle that we are able to have this communication, and we need to understand that, and we need to take seriously our mandate to disarm. So I'm going to read 2 very brief quotes. The first is from Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan said, "I believe there can be only one policy for preserving our precious civilization in the modern age. A nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought." And then I'm going to read one more very brief quote. This is from Baruch Spinoza. So we have to go back to the 16th century. And Spinoza said, "Peace is not the absence of war. It is a virtue, a state of mind, a disposition for benevolence, confidence, and justice." So thank you very much. And I'll pass the baton.
Thank you very much, John, for that, for your clarification of many of these highly complicated matters that go on. So your expertise is much appreciated. I do want to, I know, Ray, you have limited time, and Helga wanted to give a response before you had to go. So please go ahead, Helga.
Well, I think both of you, Ray and also John, you pointed to the fact which puzzles me every hour of the day, when you see the hysteria, the war psychosis going on in Europe right now, a war drive, militarization like we have not seen it, since the 30s, and I mean, it's really scary because there seems to be such a disconnect between what these establishments are saying and thinking and the reality you have been portraying so absolutely clearly. Now, the whole armament in Europe is up at this point entirely conventional, and the Russians for sure they I mean I think there's a big hesitancy to give nuclear powers to countries which don't have them yet in Europe, including Germany and possibly the European Union. So what is going on with what war are these people preparing for? I mean, I'm totally at a loss, to make any sense, because it is as if they are wasting the entire European economies into a war which will never be fought in this way. If you could say something to this question.
Well, I'll try. I think we have a Potemkin village here. I think we have a bunch of second-rate political hacks in charge of Germany, France, and Britain. I see the French saying, we've got to do this because we've been advertising this Russian threat forever. And if all of a sudden we say, oh, well, there's no Russian threat and we don't have to build up these arms, well, we're going to be thrown out of office. We're going to lose our power. And you're like, you really want that? And Stammer says, yeah, but I feel like a lemming on the cliff here. I want to ask you, Macron, do we really have to jump off this cliff? And Macron says, to do anything less would dishonor all the lemmings that went before us in history. and Mao says, jawohl, das stimmt. My God. So, that's the best I can do at coming at some sort of a logical explanation. The good news is they ain't got no money. They've been depending on raiding Russian assets, most of which are in Belgium. And it looks very clear to me that the Belgians see the financial risk in letting them do this, and they're not going to let them do it. So what money are they going to use? What weapons does the US have to give them or sell them? Well, not many, because we need to keep our, well, okay, and what money are the Europeans going to use to buy those weapons? Well, we may get them, and when the weapons come years from now, are there going to be any Ukrainian soldiers around to man them? I mean, the whole thing sounds ridiculous because, in fact, it is. Now, with respect to the strategic situation, let me just take this opportunity to follow up on John. He's quite right. I was in the midst of things in 1983 during Able Archer. So were some of the people who worked in my branch back in 1972 when we did the ABM, when we helped the administration do the ABM treaty. I was in Moscow for that. One of my analysts was named Mel Goodman. Okay, he was with the delegation in Helsinki and in Vienna, and he supported the ABM thing. And then when it came to Able Archer, was a very senior Russian analyst in the CIA. And he saw what the Russians were feeling about this. They thought it was the real thing. This was a command exercise that wouldn't quit. Okay, assets in Europe. The Russians were so worried they had nuclear weapons on the tarmac there in East German airfields. Okay, now why do I tell this story? Because Mel Goodman couldn't get his superior, Robert Gates, who I must confess was also in that same branch that I led in the early 70s. He couldn't get Gates, who was the chief of analysis, take this seriously. He went to Gates, and Gates said, nah, the Russians are, come on, they're pretending. They're not, He later said, making the Russians comfortable was not on top of my to-do list, okay? That's Gates. So what Mel Goodman did was go around Gates to the head of the CIA, Bill Casey, forced his way in the door and said, Mr. Casey, I know I'm going out of channels, but you should know the Russians think we're going to attack them with nuclear weapons. Can you stop that? And Casey listened to Mel. There were two others. And he said, thank you very much. Next thing you know, Casey went down to the White House, told them to knock it off, partly because then we had a report from a KGB asset in Britain who warned us that, yes, the KGB is telling the Soviet leadership yes to the real thing. So what am I saying here? I'm saying here that we had people with courage in those days. We even had Casey, who is the arch Russophobe, be able to listen to reason, okay? And take that reason, defy Gates, go down to the White House and get it stopped. We don't have that anymore. I don't know if we have any in the CIA. I'd have to do blind faith on that. Do we have any in the administration? I don't know. It seems that we don't. So in many ways, what Putin is doing, in my view, is trying to warn these guys. Look, as we said in 2007, as we said in 2016 to those Western journalists, which you never heard about because I was right that they would never report it. And as you heard in my State of the Union address in 2018, we got the book on you guys, and we have all kinds of ways to defeat these very expensive ABM systems. Now, will the U.S. come to its, will it understand what's going on? Hell, it really depends on whether there are people with courage, the courage of Mel Goodman, to tell the president which end is up on this score. And I wish I were more confident that there are such people. I think there are, but they have to come to the fore and risk their careers as Mel did. Mel was a very senior, super grade guy, and he took a cut in pay to go be a professor at the National Defense University. That's the kind of courage, that's the kind of principled action you need. And I appeal herewith to those people within the intelligence community to go and do likewise, for God's sake. What have you got to lose except the chance to get another promotion, or how you live with your conscience after that? So that's all I have to say about that. These were several close misses. John is quite right. There are about 5 or 6 of them. Popov was one of them, and Arkhipov in the Caribbean was another. That's how close we came. We have to be aware of that, and somehow we have to get through to Trump that he's playing with fire here. There are limits to how much he can provoke Mr. Putin.
Agreed. And maybe instead of honoring the lemmings that have come before us, we could just build them a little monument off the side of the Grand Canyon or something and leave it at that. But I don't know if there's anything more, Helga, if you wanted to respond to Ray or John. Otherwise, we can continue. Okay. Then let's continue with the agenda. Thank you, Ray, for your response. And we shall continue with our friend Jack Gilroy, who is with Veterans for Peace and Pax Christi Upstate New York and Pax Christi International. Thank you so much for joining us, Jack. It's wonderful to have you back on.
Well, thanks, Anastasia. And thanks to the Schiller Institute for letting me be on this morning to almost sound like a Pollyanna, probably, from what I'm going to have to say. But I'm trying to do a follow-up of what Helga was encouraging young people to think about as to how change might come about. And she asked students recently, preparing for this conference, to put yourself in a thoughtful state to think about what would it be like for you in years to come? What would you like to see happen to make it a livable, a better world? And she points to a 15th century Cardinal Cusa, a German scientist, mathematician, analyst of society, a kind of an amazing individual that I'm going to have to try to read more about because I frankly don't remember anything about him. the Aristotle and Plato that I studied some 65 years ago. In fact, this is still in my mind, but I don't know about Cusa. But his coincidence of opposites sounds fascinating, where he instructs people to try to think along the idea of oneness, that we are one. And I think one of the things that he did was to try to illustrate with the number of analogies, but the idea of a coin with two faces, but yet it's the one coin. It's the same coin. It's basically, you're talking about one humanity, which doesn't seem to be in the mind of many people today. The Institute for Economics and Peace say that we are actually in the worst situation since World War II, since 1947, when the Doomsday Clock was first established. That and Ray talks of this, and many others of you have talked to this with great eloquence and with great knowledge and understanding. I was a teenager in 1955, almost 20 years old, and I was a U.S. infantryman standing at the Danube looking across at nothing but rubble, except the Prater, the huge Ferris wheel, had been damaged, but it was still visible in the distance. And there was no construction going on. But if you just turned your head away from the Danube and looked at Vienna, some of the Austrians and others, Americans especially, were saying that the new national bird for Austria should be the crane, because everywhere you looked, there were cranes, and the development of Vienna was going on. At that same time, in May of 1955, the United States, Russia, France, the British agreed to leave Austria. And it wasn't the American, the French, or the British who urged that. It was the Russians. The Russians had very good reason for wanting to have Austria neutral, just as they have very good reasons for wanting Ukraine not to be in the Western camp, because they have a long history, very long history of invasion by the West. The French did it, as we all know, with Napoleon, right? Burning Moscow, destroying so much. The Germans did it. The Brits did it in the Crimean War. The Americans were there in 1918 and 1919. They have good reason to fear the West. And so the Russians, fearing the West in 1955, they were the ones, not the Americans, who called for Austria to gain its independence and to become a neutral state, not allied with the Soviets, not allied with the West. And they did, and they were very successful. They decided that they would be like a little Switzerland, right? They produced pharmaceuticals and machine tools and all the rest. And forget about the military. They didn't have to spend money for the military. And back in 1955, I saw situations of rickets among children, Austrian children, as they and their mothers sometimes picked up the spent 55 or the 30 millimeter shells that we spent in wasting all that, using machine guns to in practice for to use against the Russians. That was the whole plan. We were on alert constantly to wait for the Russians to come. But that was part of the American industrial complex game. And I didn't know it at the time. I was sold on it. I believed in it. And I think people believe in it today. But in 1955 and after, Austria, did make the changes that were necessary, but the industrial complex was very, very upset about this. In jumping ahead to when the Berlin Wall fell, the Germans had this great opportunity, right, to move away from, and they did to a large degree, move away from militarism. But the insanity has crept back, and the insanity is motivated by the by the military-industrial complex. It was pretty well said, in fact, by the CEO of Raytheon back in January of 2022, before the war started, right before the Ukrainian war started. I have, in fact, his comments here, which are very interesting. His name is Greg Hayes, and the CEO again of Raytheon, the missile maker, and he said that tensions in Eastern Europe, referring to the potential Russian-Ukraine war, tensions present a profit opportunity for this company. And he stated that we are seeing, I would say, opportunities for international sales. All of these things are putting pressure on some of the defense spending over here, over there, he said. So I fully expect we're going to see some benefit from it. Well, of course, he knew what he was saying, right? All of the Europeans, including Austria, neutral Austria, have doubled or more than that their military spending, and now attempting, as Ray was just saying, the buffoons really leading these European countries have almost no sense of what they're going, where they're going, as they do things to bring about what we all fear and have feared over the years, nuclear war. So what would a young person, what should a young person think? Well, I don't know, but I would think that if I was a young person, I would want to have elementary and middle school and high school teachers teach kids that idea that the military keeps you safe and secure is as big a lie as the Nazis used when they said a big lie was more believable than little lies, right? If they could get that across, and possibly this will come about because the Z generation are now becoming teachers, right? This is not going to be immediate, but the Z generation they're becoming the teachers. They're going to become the corporate leaders, and they're going to become the politicians. If they can end that kind of mindset, which is very difficult to do because hundreds upon hundreds of films have been written about the glory of the soldier. In a few days, we'll be having the Veterans Day in the United States, where it's not Armistice Day practice, which is the presence of peace, right, and the celebration of peace, but it's the celebration of the sacred soldier. And all around every day on television and on the news is some sort of declaration of the sacred soldier. Thank you for your service is what it is. Even if that service was, lighting hooches in Vietnam or beheading people or whatever, or polishing a general's boots. It's thank you for your service, right? Getting that out of the American mind is a very, very difficult task. And until that goes, we're going to have a hard time. But these teachers could also teach the kids to take an oath not to even interview for a military company, a corporation. They can go to veteransforpeace.org and see that oath. There's an oath on there that they can take. They will not interview for a military. And I look upon this as something that will happen in years to come as the Z generation grows. The Z generation will know that someday nuclear weapons will be, I would say that let's put the year 2050, Helga. Let's by 2050, 25 years from now, the Bering Strait tunnel will be built. The tunnel to Gibraltar will be built. The interconnection, as the LaRouche group has suggested over the years, will happen. And the work that will be involved in the connection that will be involved between people, land bridges will now be open. Cultural exchanges, economic changes will take place. And let's make it 2075. By 2075, Istanbul will be the United Nations capital. And people will come to Istanbul by train from Buenos Aires and Seattle, from Cape Town in Lagos, Nigeria. They'll come from Vladivostok to Istanbul, where the last remnants of nuclear weapons will be eliminated. That's vision that could happen if we can get our young people. They can be perverted, of course. The Z generation, which is a much greater, much better at the present time than the so-called Great Generation. The Z generation is accepting of all people. They don't have the hang-ups for war addiction. They don't have the hang-ups for sexual orientation. They have a strong sense of environment. So the possibility, the opportunity there for all of this to happen, I think is open. And I believe that the plan eventually will develop what Linda LaRouche called the Oasis Plan, and that has been discussed so many times on this program, that the Middle East could become the land of milk and honey, that it could eventually lead to a sit down between the Israelis and the Muslim people, between the Jews and the Muslims. It could happen, and it could happen with the desalination of water, with especially if fusion came about, but with tidal energy, with wind and solar and all the rest, a clean transfer of salt water from the Mediterranean could make that happen. And that economic benefit could eventually develop into a dream for all of those young people who will be at the conference in the coming weeks. So that's about all that I have to say, but thank you for the chance.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for that. No, it's very useful what you went through. I think there's going to be lots of questions that people are having. We're getting messages coming in and whatnot. But let's see. We shall continue with our.
I think Helga wanted to respond.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, very briefly. I want to actually, Jack, you mentioned the sacred soldier, and there was another speech by Pope Leo XIV 2 days later after he mentioned Nicholas of Cusa. This was in a meeting organized by Saint Egidio, by the Saint Egidio community in Rome, inviting all the religious leaders, and it was an interfaith sort of discussion. And there the Pope made another very important speech where he said that only peace is holy and not war. So I would like to really put it in front of Ray, Jack, Father Burry. I think we have I know in this forum we tried that some years ago to put all the religions together on the demand for fighting for peace. It did not work at that time, but I think now we have a new flank because this speech by Pope Leo XIV on the coincidence of opposites, and then subsequently 2 days later him meeting with all the religious leaders saying that only peace is holy. I think if we would now make a new intervention into all religions to actually at the moment where peace is so much in danger that everybody, I mean, in Germany, people are really freaking out. You know, I mean, we had several meetings, many meetings in the last, I would say, 2 weeks or so, where the average person says, I'm giving up. I don't watch news anymore. How can I immigrate? I had a discussion with my friends. We don't know where to immigrate to because it's everywhere the same thing. So I think we have reached a level of realization in the population how dangerously far we have come to the point, and how insane the official policies are, that hopefully if we would get all religions together now to act, it could really have an impact. So I would suggest that, you know, first of all, I want to hear what you think about that, but that we come up with some text. Maybe the three of us can afterwards put our minds together, like an appeal based on the coincidence of opposite approach to all religions to now come forward and really, point to the danger and the way out.
I
Go ahead,
I
Ray.
don't want to. I want to give Jack the first chance to reply since he was the last to speak. Jack, do you want to go first?
No, I'll let you go, Ray.
Okay.
I had enough to say.
Okay. Well, Jack and I are both Roman Catholics. We really appreciate what the Pope has said. The only problem is that the U.S. Catholic bishops appointed by the popes before this one don't really have good hearing. They don't listen to what the Pope says. Even less do they preach it from the pulpit. So I can't speak for Jack. But what this says to me is that it's really up to us Catholics in the United States to force the issue all by ourselves. We can't look for the leadership in the US Catholic Church because those bishops are very much in the same nature as Starmer, Merz, and Macron. They're bubbled to the top through a politicized system. I hate to say that. It's really very distressing to believe that, but there it is, laying right out. So I hope that unlike the situation during World War II, when Catholic bishops and evangelical Lutheran bishops in Germany could not find their voice, where Pope Pius XII could not find his voice, where the ultimate objective was to protect the church rather than do justice. I hope that that will be different this time, but I can't base my actions on that hope, given the experience. I'm older than the rest of you people, all right? What I say, the message from that is, it's up to us. There are enough of us. There never has been any other. We've got to make this happen and appeal to people from a faith perspective that this is just wrong. If the Catholic Church in America cannot condemn genocide, forced starvation, and the other things that are going on only with the enablement from the United States political White House, if the Catholic bishops can't speak out against that, I don't think, realistically speaking, and sad as this is to say, here in the United States at least, that we could depend on the American Catholic bishops to do much of anything except rhetoric. Jack, I hope you have a more benign,
No,
more
but I
hopeful
just
view.
wanted to straighten you out, Mr. CIA analyst, that I am your senior. You're just a kid. I'm older than you, right? No, Ray is right on. I agree with him totally. To depend upon the American Catholic bishops to take action, that is really Pollyanna. It's not going to happen. They have been appointed because they are really part of the military-industrial complex. They, sadly to say, and you have wonderful bishops like Bishop Stowe of Kentucky, who leads Pax Christi, who is quite different and is willing to speak out. But the majority will not do it, so you've got to go to the people. But you still must search for individuals like the former Jesuit John Deere, who's still a Catholic priest, but an outspoken individual, a friend of Desmond Tutu. He, of course, is the person that people should be listening to. But John travels from church to church, little connections, and he's kind of despised by those individuals in power, the bishops, because he does not think like him or like them. He's a person of total belief in the nonviolent teachings of Jesus Christ, and that's not what they do. Recently, I had the call from a Episcopal priest, pastor in Hawaii, and his name is David Ehrlich, Gaelic. And David Gaelic is probably someone you should listen to because he tells the truth. He is a religious person, a person who was once a Catholic, was once in Maryknoll, eventually became a lawyer, fell in love, got married, and became then an Episcopal priest. And from him, you get the true teaching of what nonviolence should be about. So it's that sort of peace person that is the rare individual. In the meantime, Ray and myself and other people of faith have to go it alone and get to the people in other ways. And we're doing that. Well, we're doing it right here, right now. And we do it in so many other ways. But I have pretty much given up on the clergy, and I shouldn't do that. But I've written about it in Covert Action magazine, that they have been, last year they had the clergy, 100 clergy went to the 174th Attack Wing in Syracuse, New York, a drone base, to be indoctrinated on the wonders of the assassination base. And they were okay with that. So you really can't get a lot of, the people themselves. That's where the heart is in the faith is. It's not in the administrators who happen to be bishops. Said enough on that.
Go ahead,
Just
Ray.
a footnote here. I was arrested for blocking access to that base in Syracuse about 10 years ago, ended up in Syracuse prison. There were many Catholic workers with me and Veterans for Peace. We all joyfully entered that prison, and luckily we didn't have to stay very long, just overnight, okay? So the contrast there between what committed Catholics can do and by my lights should be doing, and what just explained about the indoctrination of Catholic bishops at this Syracuse drone base could not be more stark. And the comparison is invidious, but that's where a lot of comparisons have to be. Sorry about that.
Yeah, Anastasia, can I say?
Helga was raising her hand. Go ahead, Helga. I'll go to John, and then I do want to bring in Father Bury, who is 70 years in the clergy, so and also your senior.
Wow.
Yes, I have to agree with what you both said, Ray and Jack. However, I think you have not yet listened to the speech of the Pope and recognized the significance of what it means that he quoted Nicholas of Cusa. This is a revolution. I mean, I studied Nicholas of Cusa now for 40 years, not all the time, but back and forth again and again. And, he, in the history of the church, was probably the most controversial person, sort of the Linden LaRouche of the Catholic Church. He was put on the index by the Council of Trent, and the Aristotelian faction in the clergy, in the Vatican, in the Curia, they hated him simply because he represented the method of the method of Jesus Christ, of what the best thing is about the church. I can give you a long presentation about it, but the fact that he is now being put on the official, let's say, shield. This was not a private discussion among the clergy. This was in front of thousands and thousands of people in St. Peter's Square. It was transmitted by the internet, so millions of people have access to it. I'm sure it will have a very far-reaching debate inside the church. And remember that it was Nicholas of Cusa who wanted to clean out the Catholic Church at the time of corruption. And had he succeeded, the whole split of the Protestant church would have been unnecessary. So this is of the highest significance. And I would like you to really read the speech again, read a lot about Cusa, and then we should continue the discussion, because I think it would be tragic if we would miss the flank which is offering itself through this speech.
Go ahead, John. I'll give you guys put the link back in the chat for people to grab that speech. But go ahead, John, and then I'll bring in Father Bury.
Yeah, and very, very briefly, I want to hear Father Barry for sure. So the name of my old friend John Deere came up, and I just like to recognize the plowshares movement for the sacrifice that they've made, putting their bodies on the line over and over. I was there at Ground Zero at the initial Trident, the Ohio Trident submarine, the very first Trident submarine. Participating in that blockade. And I'd just like to really briefly share just 2 verses of a song that I wrote, the only song I ever wrote. Our struggle must continue, for the job has just begun. Our sacred planet now is facing thermonuclear annihilation. Hiroshima, Nagasaki were a warning wake-up call. So let's resist the war makers, to the struggle give our all. Making peace is never easy, for the call to war is strong. Peace through strength may be their motto, but an unjust peace is wrong. Hiroshima, Nagasaki were a warning wake-up call. So let's resist the war makers, and to the struggle give our all.
You have a beautiful voice, John. You should join the chorus. Just putting in a plug there for it. But I did include in the chat the remarks from Pope Leo, which are very, very, very interesting and very important as Helga was going through, since this is the foundation of a lot of what we've been discussing for creating this new paradigm. I'm going to go to Father Bury, who let me scroll up here to my, here we go. He's the founder of the Twin Cities Nonviolent and with the U.S. Catholic Priests Association. And if people don't know him, he's also a very famous priest for his political action. He had once chained himself to the American embassy in Saigon to protest the Vietnam War, which led for him to be called the Maverick Priest. So thank you so much for joining us, Father Bury. Let's see if we can get you unmuted here. I just sent a prompt over. You see that pop up? There we go. I see the unmute. Let's hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. I really feel honored and grateful that I have a chance to share with you and build upon what has been said today. It's been really significant and helpful to most of us. And I hope the Schiller Institute continues to do what we've been doing every Friday morning. This is really significant and it's going to make a big change. I'd like to build, if I can, on what Helga said and you others. As she mentioned, last Saturday, Pope Leo was celebrating the Jubilee of Education. So the emphasis was on the intellectual life. And Pope Leo spoke of Nicholas of Cusa in a most positive way. Nicholas of Cusa was a cardinal in the church where there were challenges like we are facing today in Europe particularly. And Nicholas of Cusa was a catalyst for beginning the Renaissance It is my opinion that Nicholas of Cusa it's only an opinion now, of course, but that Nicholas of Cusa was, for the 15th century, what Lyndon LaRouche was and is for the 20th and the 21st century. Lynn LaRouche was also a Renaissance man. Both he and Nicholas of Cusa were geniuses and contributed to the world being an intellectual and financial and human development of us humans. Both believed in the unity of humanity, that we are all one. And that means that what's good for you needs to be good for me and vice versa, or it's not any good. It's not any good. Both believed in the unity of humanity, that we, being all one, are united. So both believed in the potential of humanity and the goodness of humanity. Too many people today think that there are evil people in the world. Helga has pointed out many times, and the Schiller Institute has taught that there are no evil people in the world. There are only good people who do evil things because they don't know any better. That's what Jesus said from the cross. The very people that were crucified him, he said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." They know not what they do. If those soldiers that were crucifying Jesus knew he was the Son of God, they'd have never crucified him. They didn't know any better. So both of them, Nicholas of Cusa and Lyndon LaRouche, believed in humanity. They believed that the potential of humanity is to overcome life's challenges. In this sense, they both were apostles of hope. Apostles of hope. Both presented new ways of thinking, new ways of perceiving reality. Both taught that humanity doesn't know absolute truth. What we know is probability. And that's why we keep discovering more and more truth, but we never arrive. And so that's why the intellectual life is so significant and important that Pope Leo was intending to point out to us. So both Nicholas of Cusa and Lyndon LaRouche believed in this significant potential of humanity, that we have the capability of making change for the better. So, as I say, they really are apostles of hope. Apostles of hope. Both presented new ways of thinking, new ways of perceiving reality. Both taught that no one knows absolute truth, and so that we can learn, and we need to learn, and we have the capability of learning. And that's our challenge. We're all in the process of discovering truth, but we never arrive. So nobody can be absolutely certain about what they think. Not if they understand what Nicholas of Cusa and Linda LaRouche was saying. We can all learn. We can all grow. We can all change. There is hope for the human race. Both of them encourage people to think outside the box, to think differently. And so they had enemies. The enemies spoke up and convinced people that Nicholas of Cusa, a cardinal, was really not a good person. They slandered him. And so he never was canonized a saint by the church. And Lyndon LaRouche experienced the same thing. He was slandered. They lied about him and led people to believe that he was evil. And so he went to prison. They both suffered a great deal. But they weren't discouraged. Despite what they went through, both of them had hope. Both of them saw that humanity could make changes for the good. And so they bring hope to the world. And we're to carry that on now that both Nicholas of Cusa and Lyndon LaRouche have passed on. It's our opportunity. It's the grace of God for us to follow in their footsteps and to think and come up with ways of contributing to the peace of this world. We can do it. That's what both of them said. We can do it. We, humanity, can do it. And so, let's do it. Let's be peacemakers like Cardinal Cusa, Nicholas of Cusa, and a dear friend of many of you, Lyndon LaRouche. They can be our inspiration. They can increase our hope. And that's what I perceive and expect to see happening because of them and also because of you, all of you. We're going to make a difference. We are making a difference. So we are not discouraged. We're filled with hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Burry. And thank you for everything that you do for humanity and that you've done and will continue to do for, I hope, many years to come. You've moved me. Thank you so much for for what you're doing. And also, I see the members of your organization who are also on, who have joined this meeting today. Thank all of you for what you're doing. So Helga or others, I don't know if you have a response before we want to continue. I know there was a very exciting conversation.
I just want to thank you, Father Bury. I think, in my view, this speech you just gave is probably one of the most important speeches ever given in the history of the United States. Thank you very much.
I'm grateful.
Anastasia, I'd like to add a word, if I
Go
could.
ahead. Yes.
As someone who had the honor of going to jail with Lyndon LaRouche way back when, I think that perhaps we should take the fact that Nicholas of Cusa has just been exonerated as the necessary encouragement and inspiration to make sure that Lyndon LaRouche is exonerated. Both tasks are incomplete. They both must be carried out. I also thank you, Father Bury, for what you've said, because I think those remarks of yours will make both of those tasks, which have to occur in parallel, that much more productive and that much more at hand.
Okay. Is there anything else for the discussion before we go to our last speaker? Okay. Then we shall continue. Thank you, Father Bury, and thank you, everybody, for this exciting discussion. We can come back for the discussion. We do have lots of questions coming in, but I do want to make sure we go to Dr. Sidhwa. Thank you so much, Dr. Sidhwa, for joining us. He is a humanitarian surgeon, and he's worked extensively in Palestine, but he's also been in many other nations as well, including Ukraine. He's volunteered at the European Hospital in Khan Yunus in Gaza with the World Health Organization and later with the Med Global organization. And I know you will be returning back to Gaza very shortly. So thank you so much for making time for joining us today for this discussion. And thank you for everything that you've done. Please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. It's good to be back, actually. I just wanted to give people a brief update on the Gaza Strip. You probably all know already, but really not a whole lot has changed in Gaza since the ceasefire was announced. It actually, the ceasefire from January 19th to May or to March 18th of this year was always it always felt silly to call it a ceasefire just because there was still fire going in one direction. But this one, it seems really ridiculous just because there's such a dramatic level of killing going on. Since the ceasefire, Israel has probably killed about 200 Palestinians in Gaza. Those are the numbers that are coming out of the Ministry of Health, which we know are quite significant undercounts. But yeah, no, I just wanted to let people make sure people were still aware, as again, I'm sure you are, that the situation remains very dire. The aid has not gotten into any significant degree that it's needed. It's certainly better than before, and prices have come down in the markets a little bit. But I actually strongly suspect that that has to do more with Hamas's assault on the gangs that were stealing the aid in the first place, not as much with the slight increase in aid that has happened. A few dozen trucks are getting in every day, which again is definitely better, but that's hardly sufficient. And most of Gaza is still inaccessible, and on top of the trucks getting in, it's very hard to know which trucks actually get to not just trucks, but what actual aid gets to people. There's a lot of aid that goes into the Gaza Strip, but it's behind Israeli lines. And right now, the Israelis are actually kind of they're conducting this kind of bizarre propaganda exercise where they are allowing rebuilding to happen in the compounds of these four gangs that they've been supporting in Gaza. So like the Abu Shabaab gang in Rafah, they've got nice new buildings going up in their compound and stuff like that, and they're taking pictures of this and saying, "Look, we're already rebuilding Gaza. It's so great." It's one of the more cynical things I've seen in my life, actually. Um, but you know the famine has not been famine. You can't just declare famine on and off. It takes a lot of time, obviously, to see what the effect is. But as far as anybody can tell, Gaza is still in a famine, which is you know really just kind of a technical statement at that point because Gaza has been hungry and people have been dying of hunger there since probably December of 2023. The level of killing has slowed a bit, to be sure. It's probably half or a third of what it was before, but it's still killing at a tremendous level. That's maybe matched only in Sudan right now. I don't know. Or I'm talking about killing of civilians, obviously in Ukraine. I'm sure the military death toll is quite high as well. But the killing of civilians right now is in Gaza has probably dropped to below the level of Sudan, but that's quite a low bar to clear. So so yeah, no, I am going back like you mentioned in about 2 weeks. And maybe I'll have more of an update for you guys when I'm there, just what it looks like on the ground. The last time I was there was March of this year, and even then, Khan Yunis was about every just from my own observations walking around, it seemed that every fourth building was literally destroyed. I mean, just completely unusable, or totally pancaked. And but quite literally every building had damage that, you know, to my totally untrained eye appeared structural. I mean, when the whole front of a building is missing or the whole side is missing or three of the floors have collapsed or something like that, you know, most of us would say that building has been destroyed, but people are still living in these areas. And since then, the destruction of Khan Yunis has been much more severe. The destruction of Gaza City has been much more severe. Yeah, yeah. So we're, you know, the Palestinians are all. I still speak to a lot of doctors there, and they're all hoping that even though this ceasefire is uh, morally and politically quite suspect, it's better than what was before. So they're at least happy about that. Yeah, yeah. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Sidhwa, for your report and actually what you're seeing on the ground while you're there. I wanted to ask Helga, you know, before we continue on to the discussion, if you have a response.
Well, I think it does require a miracle to get humanity from the abyss. But I think that, you know, if we are proceeding with the kind of spirit which was expressed by Father Bury, we can do miracles. And I think we should renew our commitment because, you know, I think since this war started in Gaza, that, you know, the fate of humanity will be decided on how we react to it. They may not have weapons, they may not have bombs, they may not have strategic missiles, but I think our ability or not ability to respond to something like this is probably giving testimony to our ability to survive. So I think we should absolutely continue our effort to get to the new paradigm. And I have said this many times before, and I feel totally confirmed by Pope Leo XIV's mentioning of Nicholas of Cusa, that we will solve these problems only if we move to a new paradigm in the history of humanity, which I said many times must be as different than the Middle Ages were separated from the modern times. And Cusa was the key difference in that. Because I think if we don't make the jump to the thinking the one humanity first, we will destroy ourselves through a new Third World War. So it is not a question of wanting or choice. I think either we understand what is the character of the human species, that we are not entities, who have the geopolitical right to fight each other for privileges of our respective establishments, but that we are the one humanity and that we have to rise to the conscience of the world, basically acting on that basis, that there is no legitimate interest which does not take the interest of the one humanity first. And that has to be discussed and made understandable. And then everything would be easy. It would be very easy to resolve any conflict once you take that attitude. So that's all I can say in response to what was presented here by Dr. Sidhwa and everybody else.
Thank you, Helga.
If can I add to that just for a second? Actually, and not to contradict you in any way, but I think the world, I think the unhinged viciousness and also just lack of any attempt to even hide it in Gaza over the past 2 years, and you could certainly talk about what happened before as well, but no doubt the last 2 years have really driven the world mad. In not and I say I mean that actually in a good way, mad with a desire to stop what is going on. And I think it has driven a lot of, I talk on a lot of college campuses and stuff like that, medical schools. And the young people I encounter, and I mean under 30 or 40 even, are it's perfectly obvious to them that you cannot square what's being done to Gaza, or what we have done to Gaza, with just basic innate human values. I mean, these aren't people who know the names that you've all been talking about here, but it's just impossible to square any decent understanding of what humanity ought to be with just the pictures that come out of Gaza, let alone any understanding of them. So I think I think if anything can come good from the martyrdom of Gaza's children, I think it will. I hope it can be the changes that you were just talking about, and not just changes in consciousness, because I think that's largely happened actually, but changes in the willingness to act and to say we are not going to be involved in this kind of thing anymore. It's my hope.
That's a very good point, Dr. Sidhwa. Thank you. I know that I see your hand up, Ray. Dennis Speed had a question for Dr. Sidhwa, and then I'll go back to you, Ray.
Yeah,
So
Ray's
let
going
me
to have
go
a
ahead, Dennis.
comment. My question is very straightforward, which is that obviously, Dr. Sidhwa, you've been doing volunteer work there. You, Dr. Nathan Perlmutter, that's how we sort of met. And of course, there have been testimony at the various organizations, but and you began to answer part of what I was going to ask you. But what do you've been there? You're going back. Obviously, as a physician, you're dealing with trauma and atrocity all the time. As a person, you've already identified, and I know you close to my friend Jose Vega,
Mhm.
and so on forth, so forth. So, and it often, in this kind of a forum, you're asking people about a particular thing. But I just wonder if there's anything else that you have as reflection as to what both needs to be done and also why you do and other people like you do what you do.
Oh, I mean, we do what we do for the same reason you're all doing what you're doing right now. I mean, I happen to have a particular skill set that I can apply directly to people, so that I'm lucky in that way. And I've done international work for a long time. I like to say it recharges my moral batteries when I'm able to come back to the U.S. I can, you're retired obviously, but it's very there's something very, it does something to your psyche, I guess. I don't know what to say about it when you encounter people whom you help, and they're almost confused as to why you care if they live or die. Like they just don't. They're like, you're not from here. You don't. You're not. But they're just eternally grateful, and that you can give them their kids back, and they can go on with their lives. And it's just I think I benefit from it as much as, if not more than they do. Um, so maybe it's just selfish in the end. Who knows? But and then sorry, but what was the first part of the question?
No, just you dealt with the question. That's fine. That's fine. I think we should let Ray has his has his hand up. So I'd like to see what he has to say.
Go ahead, Ray.
Dr. Sidhwa, thanks so much. My question has to do with action. You said you've spoken at many medical schools and so forth. Is there a very long line of U.S. doctors, not necessarily of Palestinian origin, just trying to get into Gaza to employ what you call their skill sets? My impression, and I hope I'm wrong, is that the organization, the AMA and the other institutions really are just not really all that involved. Are individual doctors really involved, or do they take the Hippocratic oath literally just to not to do any harm, but not necessarily to prevent others from doing harm?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I try to emphasize is that it's not others that are doing harm, it's us. I'm assuming you're an American who pays taxes, and so am I. The,
Right.
so, I still remember there was on March 18th, that's when the widespread bombing of Gaza resumed. And the first kid I found that could live that day was a little girl named Shaman. While I was getting her kind of readied up to go to the operating room, she had a wound to her left cheek, and I was just watching a little bit of blood trickle out of it. And I just thought, like, did I pay for this shrapnel, or did my neighbor, or did my other neighbor, did my mom, like who paid? It's us. It's American airplanes dropping American bombs, burning American jet fuel. The bombs are using American guidance systems. It just happens to be flown by an Israeli pilot. That's a US attack on Gaza as far as I'm concerned. Like that's kind of what more motivates my moral sense in this regard. Sorry to actually answer your question. So if anyone's interested, we, meaning American healthcare workers who've worked in the Gaza Strip, have sent 3 letters to the president since Biden was in office. The first was July 25th, I think. The second was October 2nd. These were all last year. And then the last one was October 1st of this year, if I remember the date right. If you go to GazaHealthCareLetters.org, you can read them. So the first letter had 45 signatures on it. The second one had 99, and this one had, if I remember, it had 154. Most of those doctors are of either Arab or Palestinian descent for sure, but I'd say about a third are not. Like I'm not, and there's a wide variety of not just medical specialties, but they're, I think, from virtually every state, if not actually every state. Tons of different congressional districts. Like there are groupings, like there's a big group in Dallas and stuff like that. But yeah, so they've definitely been there. There are a lot of American, and not only American, European, Canadian, Australian, as well, but especially American physicians, who and nurses and others who have gone to Gaza to help directly. And most of us, or I shouldn't say most of us, but a large chunk of us have been quite vocal since getting back. Most of us just end up giving local talks, to the local medical school or local church or mosque or synagogue or whatever it might be. Quite a few of us have actually tried to make a bigger impression. Like I wrote an article in the New York Times last year about what 65 American doctors and nurses saw in Gaza. That was the article where we talked about the widespread shooting of children and things like that. And quite a few others have tried to make a big impact. I know the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification declaration of famine in Gaza was not totally, to be sure, but largely driven by the private testimony of physicians to the IPC. And there have been the UN report on genocide in Gaza, the recent one. Cited our New York Times article, for example, stuff like that. So we've been trying to do things in that way. The American medical institutions, have been very, very bad in this regard. That shouldn't be surprising. These are institutions of the elites, and they're not populist. They're not popular organizations. But one thing, actually, maybe I should mention this more often. I never have thought about it until now. But the same way the population, especially young people, have really been galvanized by Gaza and really I don't know, galvanized isn't the right word. Their consciousness has been awakened by Gaza because it's impossible. We all see it. It's just impossible to watch these things. And these people are these kids are so online. They get so much information directly from Instagram or Facebook and these things are censored themselves to be sure, but it's not mainstream media coverage. It's much rawer. They can see some really things that they would never have thought they would seen, children with their arms blown off, with their heads blown off, really awful stuff. And in the same way that has prompted them to action and to social and moral and political awakening. I think the fact that the American Medical Association, the American College of Surgeons, whatever these other big organizations are, won't even make a comment, not even a condemnation, but just a public comment about the widespread killing of healthcare workers is very that has made a lot of that has brought a lot of physicians, those who've gone to Gaza, but also who haven't, to an awareness that these organizations are actually maybe not actually being run in terribly democratic fashion. Like I'll give you an example. I was there was the American College of Surgeons has their meeting in October, their annual meeting, and it was in Chicago this year. So we get the program, and it's a huge meeting. I think there's 10,000 people there. We got the program, and there was a session called Humanitarian Crisis Generated by Conflict: The Role of Doctors, or something like that, right? That is a session that is tailor-made to be like 90% about the Gaza Strip. There wasn't even anybody on it who has been to Gaza. They had to fill in time, so they had some American military surgeon who had worked in Afghanistan 20 years ago. It was like, what? Yeah, he did good work. There's no doubt about that, but it's hardly relevant to the modern day. Like now, because physicians are actually organizing a little bit amongst themselves, we had just a little WhatsApp group, and we said, how can what can we do? Like, it's not we can't go and like disrupt the session. That's just not going to go well with, it's not going to go over well with them. This is not a public event. So that's not going to work, but we're all members of the American College of Surgeons. So we all signed up. And we actually got to the fellow who was moderating the session, who's a sensible, reasonable human being. And we said, look, man, it's weird that there's nobody from Gaza. And he said, I brought that up. I asked specifically if I could have you, meaning me, on the panel, and the ACS just said no. So we said, okay, how about if a bunch of people who've been in, because it's not about me, right? It's just about relaying this experience and making sure people know about it. So we said, how about if several of us actually show up, and during the Q&A, we can talk about that. If the ACS doesn't want it to be on the official program, it can just be the Q&A. Okay, sure. So we did that. I think 10 of us showed up, and because most of the people who have been to Gaza, or not most, but a large proportion, are surgeons, just because of the nature of the work that's needed there. And so we showed up, and the people, one after another, were very harshly critical. Simon Fitzgerald, who's a Jewish surgeon in New York, he runs a program called Trauma Code, a radio program called Trauma Code, and he's a trauma surgeon at Kings County. He got up and he said, I appreciate what the moderator said, that Gaza's not on here. It's just a logistical problem, but we all know it's cowardice on the part of the American College of Surgeons. Another surgeon, Mike Mallah, who is Palestinian, he got up and he really made a very very moving appeal, more to the room than the panel, saying that I genuinely feel he said he was beside himself after this panel, and not because nothing, everything that was discussed in the panel was informational and useful, but he came close to getting badly hurt in Gaza. I was about 2 minutes away from getting killed when Nasser Medical Complex was bombed and one of my patients was killed in his room. I was on my way to his room when he was killed. These are things that have continually happened, and it's only by a miracle that an American physician hasn't been killed in Gaza yet. Obviously, plenty of others have been, and it's probably not a miracle. It's probably deliberate. The Israelis probably try to avoid doing that on purpose. But what Mike said, and I think he's right. He said, like, I don't think the ACS would even care if I got killed in Gaza, and that's pretty shocking. For like, not only does our own government not care if we get killed, and we all know that, but even our own professional society doesn't care if we get killed. I mean, you can't just make a simple, right now, actually, we have about 200 fellows of the American College of Surgeons, including some very, very senior surgeons in the United States. You wouldn't recognize their names, but they're very well-known senior people in the U.S. who've signed a letter to the ACS saying that the ACS should just simply issue a statement on the killing of healthcare workers in Ukraine and Gaza, because those are the two worst examples. Gaza is 3 orders of magnitude worse, but that's not but just for political reasons, it was easier to include both. And like you said, I've worked in Ukraine, and it's also a disaster. And they came back and they said, well, we can't make that statement because we don't make political statements. When has not killing healthcare workers been about politics? Like, which political party advocates the killing of healthcare workers? What are you talking about? This is absurd. I mean, the Nazi Party, maybe, other than that. It was just a ridiculous claim. So what we've learned in this past, sorry, I'm going on for too long, I apologize, but what we've learned in this past like year and a half of activism around Gaza is that these institutions do not function democratically, very much like our own country. And so now we're moving from petitioning them to trying to take them over in some way, or not take them over, but have some meaningful influence. Stop asking the king if he'll do what you want, but instead just take the palace. So that's what we're working on now. That's unfortunately a very long-term thing, but hopefully it'll have some effect in the future. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sidhwa. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting some separate messages here that I'm now in the middle of reading while I'm doing this. Okay, well, let's, just because we're approaching time, I apologize to the people who have sent in questions, just because we're coming up on 1:30 in the next 15 minutes. I think we've had a fantastic dialogue. There's a lot for us to take from here. I'm going to pass the torch over to Dennis Speed to do roundup questions, roundup for the discussion while I gather up all the links for the meeting. So let me pass it over to Dennis.
Yeah, let me just say to everybody that Dr. Sidhwa, we very much appreciate what you went through. That was unexpected. It was very good. It's going to be very useful for, I think, to everybody that was on. But because of the nature of the way in which the whole discussion today exploded, we want to give several people the opportunity to make comments, roundup comments. We have to end at 1:30, so we have about 13 minutes. And so let me first ask Dr. Sidhwa if there's anything else you'd like to say, and then we'll go from you to Father Berry and so on.
No, please. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm sure people have not heard before what you went through. So Father Berry, let me come back to you. And actually, is Jack Gilroy still with us? He's not?
Yes, he is. He's
He
here.
is. Okay. So Jack, anything you'd like to say as a roundup, final comments?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, I guess I would just like to say that the comments about Pope Leo XIV, that Helga, and we know that the whole concept of the just war is not a basic Christian, statement, not a statement of Jesus Christ that would say that there are times when you can kill, and this is what Ambrose, the church doctors, Ambrose, Thomas Aquinas, and Augustine said. So I hope that Leo XIV is not sied in by his soft talk and just become a tool of the military-industrial complex, because they are in control today. And I would just like to also say that thank you, Doctor, very much for your service, real service, true service. And I think what we really need is for the G generation to begin to debunk Zionism as the central focus for control of the media. It's well known that the New York Times and CBS are major Zionist organizations. You can check that out. This is in to have people continually say, if you say something like I just said, that you're anti-Semitic is totally absurd, as Jewish Voice for Peace will agree. That's about all for now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jack. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for what you're doing. Father Berry, I think you have to unmute again. Yes.
Jesus said, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who persecute you. He didn't say, love your enemies except in self-defense. He said, love your enemies, be good to those who hate you. And that's where we need to go in active nonviolence. We need to treat our enemies as friends, and they'll become friends. When I was in Gaza, the guard that was over me said that the reason that Hamas was about to become the governing body in Gaza that by election is because they were giving the people in Gaza food and medicine. And so if we were giving food and medicine to those who hate us, it would change things altogether. That's part of the new paradigm. And I wish we would consider that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Berry. And thank you for the entire way in which you have changed the way that many people have thought about this concept of evil, as we saw at the United Nations when you recently visited New York. John Steinbach, not the writer, but
Well, I've been writing about Israel, Palestine for 30 years or more, and particularly about Israel's nuclear weapons program. And the comment I want to make is that the Israel primarily uses its nuclear weapons in the sense that it says, if you don't do what we want, we're going to use nuclear weapons. I think the principal time that happened was back in 1972-73 during the Yom Kippur War, and when Israel was losing, and Nixon and Kissinger said, we want you, we're not going to send you weapons, and Israel said pretty bluntly, if you don't give us weapons, we're going to use our nukes, and they caved in. They did it, and so that's how Israel's able to get away with atrocities, many atrocities over the years, as the doctor said. But now Gaza, it's part of the reason they can get away is just always threatening to use their nukes. So as we're talking about Ukraine and nuclear weapons, we need to understand that the primary holder of nuclear weapons is Israel, and it's a big problem.
Okay, John. Thank you. Ray, are you there? I don't see him on my screen, so I'm just asking.
Can I be heard?
Yes, you can, Ray.
Thank you. Well, I thank all the co-panelists, especially Father Berry, for bringing us such inspiration. I guess I just pick up on what John just said with respect to 1973 and the Israelis threatening to use their nuclear weapons. It was at that point where Kissinger went to Nixon and said, look, there's got to be a way this doesn't happen again. We can't have the Arabs attacking Israel anymore. So let's make them Oh, let's make them a former ally. Let's offer them a mutual defense treaty. Now, folks, that happened. We're talking 1973, 1974. Some of my friends were involved in that overture. And guess what the Israelis said? Oh, isn't that sweet? Oh, thanks so much, but thanks, but no thanks. Whoa. Why would any nation refuse to have a mutual defense treaty with the United States? Well, two reasons. Mutual defense treaties require internationally recognized borders. Israelis don't want to go anywhere near that. And secondly, mutual defense treaties require that one party, if they're going to take off after another country, bomb or missile the hell out of them, it's sort of de rigueur that they check with their ally and say, well, we're going to bomb Lebanon or Egypt or Somalia, and the Israelis didn't want any part of that. So the Israelis are just pleased as punch to have the example that we have now, which is total subservience by our country's leaders. I mentioned President Trump, to the whims of Israel. Last thing I'll say is I think one lesson that comes from this discussion is how, at least at my age, we can't depend on institutions. I hate to say it, but Cesar Chavez, the farm workers leader, he said, let's have a grape boycott, and else no, we can't do that. Why not? Because there aren't enough of us. And Cesar Chavez said, look, there are enough of us, but nothing's going to happen if there's no action. And you know how that came out. Lastly, my favorite theologian, Annie Dillard, said famously, look, there's only us. There never has been any other. I don't mean diss the institutions, but don't make the mistake of thinking that you should waste a lot of energy into making the institutions move when they move at a glacial pace, when the need is so urgent as it is in Gaza. And I want to thank the doctor once again for being there and going back, and God help him and let him not be the first U.S. doctor casualty.
Thank you very much for that, Ray. Yes, certainly the issue of not trusting institutions has seemed to not just characterize this conversation, but the lives, I think, of pretty much everybody on at the moment. And with that in mind, let me now go. I think we've covered everybody except for Helga. So if you could sort of give us the final word here.
Well, I would like to address something which has not been raised, at least not directly among the people here discussing, but I have seen a written question which came in where one of the people asked, basically, why put any faith in religions, given the fact that, many trouble and wars have come from the religious tensions among different religions and so forth. I want to say something really very fundamental on this point. First of all, the negative things coming from religion in all cases came from not the truth-seeking representatives of that religion, but of the fundamentalists of various kinds who did not try to pursue the word of God or the meaning of creation and the role of man in that, but some other fundamentalist conception. And in all religions, you find a current for whom science and faith were not a contradiction. In the Catholic Church, it was emphatically the Augustinian tradition, because St. Augustine recognized, who was a very different kind of worldly person before he became so faithful, because he recognized at a certain point that Plato had discovered practically everything in Revelation centuries before the emergence of Jesus Christ on earth. And from that, he concluded that it was possible to arrive at fundamental truths through reason, and that there was no contradiction between faith and science. And I think that's a very important conception, because if you throw out religions altogether because they are, somehow opium for the people, or whatever you may find as a epithet, you're throwing out the fundamental question of in the history of humanity, where did progress occur? And, my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, was very famous for that. He basically said that if people want to become creative, you have to not learn the textbooks and what the footnotes of professors are saying, but you have to try to make as many fundamental discoveries yourself, trying to replicate what were the essential steps forward in human history. And if you take that approach, there can be no question that Nicholas of Cusa, for example, represents one of the absolute, major discoveries of the laws of the universe, of the method how to discover the laws of the universe. As a matter of fact, if you engage in the wealth of Cusanus's work, you will find unbelievable things about, astronomy, about justice, about history, about experiments. As a matter of fact, he started modern science by defining scientific experiments. It's now too short to give it justice all. But I want to say that, in the 15th century, the one person who made the most fundamental discoveries about the lawfulness of the universe was Nicholas of Cusa. So even if you look at it only from the history of science, you can't get around Nicholas of Cusa. Even if you are a convinced Marxist or atheist or whatever, and you want to have a truthful scientific history of the progress of mankind, you will have to deal with Nicholas of Cusa. So I want to just encourage everybody to really, go to the sources. And that's very beautiful. Pope Leo XIV also in the same sermon said, we have to go back to the sources, as all the humanists did. That is very important, because if you do that, you can undo a lot of, there are right now tremendous efforts to use AI and nudging to convince people of a loud narrative. And that narrative is supposed to replace historic, scientific, poetic truth. But if you go back to the sources, you can outflank that. And that's why I think you should use that method to go back to the sources, to the original writings of people like Solon, Plato, Augustine, Cusanus, Leibniz, Benjamin Franklin, Confucius, and all the other sources. But especially read Cusanus and read Lyndon LaRouche, and you will discover a whole universe, and it will help you to bypass all the efforts to manipulate you and get you to believe a narrative which is only serving the interest of certain circles. So I think this was, in my view, one of the absolute better, fruitful discussions we ever had. And I want to thank you, Father Bury, because you touched, I guess, not only my soul in the most profound way, but I'm sure that you touched the soul of many. And that is what is required, because, we have to spark that love for humanity in people, unfiltered of all the efforts to manipulate our views. And I think, with that, we should renew our effort. And I would still like to get in touch with Ray, Father Bury, you, and Jack, and maybe also John, if you want, because when I'm saying we should capitalize of this speech of the Pope, I didn't mean that I would put my trust in the official churches, because in Germany, I mean, the Pax Christi in the United States is a miracle as compared to Pax Christi in Europe. You know, they are completely on two different sides. So I'm not even putting my faith in Pax Christi, which may be good here, but may not be so good elsewhere. So I still would like to get back to you that we discuss an appropriate way of intervening into this, because I think the Pope spoke, the people pick it up. So that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I see Ray, you have your hand up, so I'd make sure did you have
Yeah,
something?
just a quick comment. We can't do without Nicholas, but Father Berry could say this better than I. We can't do without Jesus Christ either. And what I mean by that is the Sermon on the Mount. Father Berry quoted part of that. Now, when Kurt Vonnegut, the arch humanist, atheist, agnostic, was asked, Kurt, what do you think about Jesus Christ? He said, well, I don't know if he was God or not, but if there were no Sermon on the Mount, I think I'd just as soon be a cockroach. Maybe we could contemplate that too. Read the Sermon on the Mount in parallel with Nicholas of Cusa.
Okay, that's good advice. And we'll leave it at that. Back to you, Anastasia.
Great, thank you. This has been a really fruitful and rich discussion. Thank you all for participating and your contributions, and thank you to the audience who have participated in this. I'm going to post some links from the meeting today, which I'm posting in the chat, and I also have a general announcement, which let me share my screen. For the next IPC next week, please join us for the conference in Paris. So next Friday, we'll have the meeting on Friday. We'll have it on Saturday. Please join us for the second panel, which is the afternoon panel. It starts at 3 p.m. Eastern European Time, which is 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So please join us. And then Sunday, people are aware we have the time change again. So, but we have some pretty fantastic speakers who will be joining us, including Princey. We've had Princey on here before and many other meetings. She's absolutely fantastic. We have, I'm sorry, and I don't recognize a lot of the names, but we have a lot of very fantastic people who will be joining us from Africa. So please join us for this second panel and be part of the discussion period. We look forward to having you on. Here we go. And in terms of the links, I am including that link in the chat so people can see it. If you don't have it, please go to Solidarité et Progress. If you're on any of the broadcasting videos right now that we have across the different platforms, go to Solidarité and e-Progress, and you will find it there. So one, please sign up for the IPC emails. I have including that link in the chat for people to do that. You can also go to the schillerinstitute.com, and on the top of the web page, there is a RSVP page to register to sign up for the Zoom link, and you'll be updated every week. But my emails that I send out are a weekly newsletter and reminders for the meetings. Please also feel free to share this video. This video has been live broadcast across many platforms. The link is in the chat, or if you're on YouTube, this is the video that you can use. Just give credit to the International Peace Coalition. And if you're interested in broadcasting and joining other people who are broadcasting, excuse me, French, you're in the wrong channel.
Sorry.
No problem. If you are interested in rebroadcasting this stream with us every week, please just contact me at anastasiammares@gmail.com, and we can discuss it. I'm also including the elders call on Trump to release Marwan Barghouti. You can find that at eir.news. Also, Pope Leo's discussion of Cusa at the with 10,000 Jubilee pilgrims in St. Peter's Square, and Prime Minister Orban's announcement of a nationwide anti-war tour. All of this you can find on eir.news, as well as the Putin, this is the article that Ray McGovern mentioned, Putin Berezhnik missile technology. That is on there as well. The Gaza healthcare letters, please go to gazahealthcareletters.org to find the letters that Dr. Sidhwa had mentioned. The link is in the chat, as well as the 10 principles for new security and development architecture, which is based on the principles that Helga had mentioned around Nicholas of Cusa. Please read this. Give us your feedback. Let us know what you think on how what Helga had posed around creating a new security and development architecture. We would love to hear your feedback and your thoughts on this. And then also the November 8th event in Paris, 8th and 9th event. I look forward to seeing people there. I hear that a number of IPC members will be joining, so I look forward to meeting you in person. Please share the video or the register page for that to get other people on if you can't make it in person. And then also the Oasis Plan resources, which you can find at theschillerinstitute.com. And please subscribe to the Executive Intelligence Review Daily Alert. As Ray McGovern and others who have mentioned many, many times, this is by far one of the best briefs that you can get, a general overview and fully digested comprehension of what is happening in the world. If you want to think like a president or like a prime minister and have a fully digested idea of what's happening and what you can do to intervene on the world, subscribe to the Executive Intelligence Review magazine. Many people on this discussion today not only subscribe, but also contribute their ideas and thoughts to this intelligence journal and the Daily Alert. So you can get it in English and in German. It's $10 a month for the English and 10 euros a month for the German. And there is also a new EIR show, which we have regular interviews weekly with various leaders. We just had an interview, which you just did, Dennis Small, with President Donald Ramotar, which was fantastic. Definitely want to encourage people to check that out. And then please email me if you have questions, thoughts, initiatives, reports, ideas for the next agenda. Please message me, anastasiammares@gmail.com. My last name, maiden name is spelled M-A-R-E-S, Anastasia M-A-R-E-S @gmail.com, or anastasia.battle@proton.me. And I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. And with that, thank you everyone for joining us. I look forward to seeing you on Saturday, not Friday, Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. European. So thank you all for joining us. Have fun causing good trouble and or bad trouble, just any kind of trouble, causing some trouble. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.